The average height for someone in the 18th century, if you're a man in England, was 5 foot 5 inches. That's your average height. Admiral Duncan is described as being at least 6 foot 4 inches. At least. And broad. We are talking about a man who was an absolute tower of an individual. A tower of power. He was handsome, striking. He was well spoken, eloquent. He was gregarious. He was trustworthy. He is one of those officers for whom history cannot talk enough and never does, because he is a giant of the time and he wins a major battle, but he lives in a time where there are Rodneys, there are Howes, there are Nelsons, there are Collingwoods, there are Jervises. And so he gets a bit ignored. But I would point out that Admiral Duncan has had many, many ships named for him. In fact, he's been far common than a lot more of those names, and there is an Admiral Duncan serving in the Royal Navy to this day, a Type 45 destroyer. And that's because of the legacy and memory within the Navy. You see, the state, the nation might honour Nelson, and they might honour the others, but the Navy doesn't forget this admiral, because he was important to its soul. He was important as an example of hard work, of good leadership, and more importantly, of calm, competent professionalism. Plus, he's also the man who literally shouted at mutineers at one point, "Do you trust me?" Quite literally shouted, "Do you trust me?" As a way to get them to stop mutinying. He gave them his word he'd get them their pay. So did they trust him? They didn't trust the Admiralty. Did they trust him? They trusted Admiral Duncan. There's also the fact that on his own ship earlier, when someone had tried to take it, as he said, try and take a ship from him, he dangled them over the side of the ship by their legs and gone, "So anyone want to take my ship from me?" The thing is, they didn't want to sack Duncan. They didn't like the Admiralty. They were upset at not getting paid, but they liked Duncan. And did I mention Duncan is almost a foot taller than the average height of the guys in this period? Full foot taller, broad, well raised, broad Scotsman. Spent his life at sea. A very competent fighter. Considered at certain points one of the best swordsmen in the Royal Navy. The actual description I'm reading from, and I've got notes there, is one of the best swordsmen and definitely the best pikeman in the Royal Navy. So we don't know how he got that description from one of the captains at the time. So yeah, Keppel loved him. He is a man who, in the Keppel Palliser affair, was considered such a persuasive and strong personality, the Admiralty really didn't want him there. We'll explain why and how that failed later as we get in video. And yeah, Admiral Duncan. He is an excellent, exceptional individual. And he truly is that. He is one of those people in history who it's a pleasure to talk about, because he was exactly who he said he was and never bothers to be anything different. There is no hiding who he is. He doesn't care. And that makes him even more special. It really does. It really makes him special. Born in Dundee, Scotland, in July 1731, he died in Cornhill-on-Tweed in 1804. He first joined the Navy, and this was quite useful. You know, he got educated in Dundee first, and he joined the Royal Navy aboard the sloop Trial under Captain Robert Haldane, and afterwards on HMS Shoreham in 1746. When peace is declared in 1748, well, he has a bit of time on his hands. But in 1749, he's appointed to HMS Centurion. And being appointed a Centurion was pretty good for him because she'd just been commissioned under the Honourable Augustus Keppel, future Viscount Keppel, and First Sea Lord and various other things. And, well, Keppel likes him. Keppel really likes him. He is a smart young officer, and he's capable. And this is where the patronage system really starts to shine. When you're a good officer, a good senior officer, and you spot a good junior, you grab hold of them with both hands because they're going to be useful to your future career. Literally, Duncan joins Keppel's crew as a midshipman. An experienced midshipman, but still a midshipman. And he serves with him in the Mediterranean on Centurion, and then he also goes to HMS Norwich on the coast of North America with Keppel still, and actually makes it to lieutenant in January 1755. Now, so far he's managed to avoid major battles, but he's had a lot of experience. A lot of experience already. And if you think about it, 1755, he's been in the service for 9 years. 9 years. He's 24 years old. When you start to look at Duncan, he is probably the one who has the most traditional period of service between promotions. One of those reasons is that he basically keeps serving in these places where you want to have good quality people, but they might not have a lot of action. So they're not going to get a lot of chance of being promoted underage. And the thing is, as long as they don't muck up, they still have a good chance of getting up there and getting up in seniority. But as I've said before many times, the idea that you're a naval officer just gets promoted based on seniority to the ranks of admiral, etc., it's the theory, but it's not the practice. Because in practice, the Admiralty can accelerate someone's promotion for good service. They can also send you down to the bottom of the list if they think you've done something demeritorious, or kick you out of the Navy entirely. They can do all sorts of things to your career. So the whole idea that just because they've been in for a long time, they're going to get to the top doesn't ring true. And as I said, also, the Royal Navy has the options of promoting you to an Admiral of the Yellow. They literally come up with a whole squadron. They have the red, blue, white, and yellow. And the yellow means they are going home. Shore service only. Retire. Yes, you've made it to Rear Admiral. We have no reason to get rid of you. We've found no reason to demerit you. But we really don't want you in charge of a fleet. So here, go take charge of the Yellow. And we'll call you. You don't need to call us. But you're a Rear Admiral, so you can go and tell everyone you're a Rear Admiral. You're just permanently on a shore leave. Now, Keppel really likes this young man. He's a lieutenant, but he's smart. As I've talked about before when talking about Augustus Keppel, there is something high-born about him, high-natured. He doesn't really... Honestly, he doesn't really live in the same world as mere mortals, and so a lot of the things that mortals worry about don't really affect Keppel. But things that do affect Keppel, things that really do affect Keppel, is he needs people who are able to keep up with him. He's smart, but he's not able to necessarily communicate with people who aren't as fast as he is on the uptake. Duncan is. Duncan's not only able to communicate with Keppel and keep up with him, he's able to act as a translator with the rest of the crew. This is the thing that gets noted quite a bit. There's even discussions often afterwards, because they have quite a long relationship in terms of working together, that the Admiralty is specifically at certain points when looking at commands are going, is Duncan free to go with Keppel. Because Keppel's a great officer. But it's kind of like Leonard and Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. Sheldon, very, very smart, super brilliant physicist, but really not that good at communicating with regular people. Really not that great. Leonard, pretty much as smart, but far better at communicating. Far better at communicating. Can understand Sheldon, can communicate with other people. Often ends up acting in the intermediary role. Slightly different difference of focus, etc. One of them is an experimental physicist, the other one's a theoretical physicist. So if you haven't watched the show, go watch it. It's a comedy, it's quite funny. Well, that's the kind of relationship you have here, where, added to that, Keppel is also a mentor to Duncan. Because for Keppel, this is the greatest thing he's found in his... This is the person he's found who actually makes it possible for him to get senior rank. For him to be a practical admiral. Yes, he's got the qualifications. Yes, he's got the skills to do it. But he hasn't got the communications ability. He hasn't got the ability to keep the people... He expects everyone to understand him, and they don't. But Duncan does. Duncan can get them. And the problem really comes because Keppel doesn't wish to hold Duncan back. And so he pushes Duncan to go off to his own commands and his own things. And stop being used by the Admiralty in many ways as the Keppel Whisperer. And that leads to all sorts of interesting things. But slowly, as he upgrades his ships, as he gets better, as Keppel gets better ships, so does Duncan, and so does he get the experience. He follows Keppel to Swiftsure and then HMS Torbay. And this is not unusual at the time. As I've said before, patronage often works by you building up followings of officers, etc. And a good captain, if they found a good lieutenant, will go along. And every single time they're going through those ships, Duncan is getting promoted up. Oh, you've now served as a 5th lieutenant, a 4th lieutenant, a 3rd lieutenant. You're slowly going up the ranks of lieutenant. De facto, that you to an extent are being used as captain's aide as well as lieutenant. You are doing those jobs well. And he's getting a lot of experience because of it. He's also often, and this is one of the fun things you find about Duncan, some of the stuff, it's like, there's actually, when they are part of the fleet, the Channel Fleet, under it's Hawke, in the fleet that eventually fights at Quiberon Bay, he ends up missing out on that battle. He ends up missing out on that operation because he gets promoted. But the thing is, when they're having their meetings and Hawke is calling for meetings of the captains, he specifically sometimes the messages to Keppel include specifically, Keppel, come to the meeting. Can you bring your executive officer? Can you also bring Lieutenant Duncan? Because Keppel is smart. Hawke knows he's smart. But Keppel sometimes needs along the person who's going to get everyone to understand and listen to Keppel. And this is a really interesting period of Admiralty management, and it's one of those things of, we like to pretend today that it's HR management and constructing teams and working out how to balance personalities is something new, is something we've invented in the last century. It isn't. Leaders have been having to do that with their subordinates in organising and making formations for a very, very long time. Now, HMS Swiftsure, she's a 70-gun third-rate ship of the line. Torbay, she's a 90-gun second-rate ship of the line, otherwise known as HMS Neptune. She is a very interesting ship because you have to remember when they go aboard her in 1756, she is theoretically theoretically, if you're believing the Royal Navy, is 79 years old. Because honestly, she was launched as part of the 1677 30 Great Ships program. Officially launched in 1683. Officially launched, but yeah. So, you've got, there's a whole debate about her, how old she is. But still, even if you go by 1683 rather than 1677, she'd still, by the time they're aboard her in 1756, she'd still be 73 years old. Now, the thing is, she'd had a rebuild in 1710 and 1730. But she's the same ship. We honestly do declare she's the same ship. And the fact that we've changed her name a couple of times along with her rebuild, and that she, those things, that no, she's the same ship, okay? This is quite honestly the ship the Royal Navy ordered in 1677 and finally launched in 1683 to a slightly modified design and then rebuilt exactly the same, we honestly declare, in 1710 and 1730. Honestly. She is the same ship. But she has a good bit of history. She really does. She really does have a good bit of history. Now, one of the interesting things that happens, and I'll be getting into the actual battles he fights in this period because he does get some interesting battle experience. There is something else which happens aboard Torbay. There's the capture of La Roche in 1756. Now, in November 1756. There's a really interesting note about this because the actual operation, when it happens, they capture this privateer and they send it back to England. They're sending it to Milford Haven with a crew of 8 from HMS Torbay aboard and 2 of the former French crew aboard. The former French crew managed to break out their cabin, kill one, wound the others, and managed to imprison them. But eventually the 7 surviving British then managed to retake the ship, overpower them, and eventually get it in to Milford Haven. However, interesting comment. Now, why am I mentioning this particular story? Because one of the discussions put forward, and one of the things that's come through in the discussion about it, was why wasn't Duncan aboard that ship? He's a lieutenant. He could take a prize home. And there does seem to have been some discussion amongst naval officers at the time. And this is where my family history starts to come from. So I cannot really 100% testify to this one. But my family was served in the Royal Navy at various points throughout its history. And we have big, massive family Bibles. And one of the stories that has come down through that is of an officer drinking later with Keppel and the officers of his crew. And my great uncle was a captain at the time. And the story that comes down and was written up actually in the family Bible by his wife, because our family in the Scottish side did know Duncan's family a bit, so they tend to include gossip. Okay, it's gossip, but the gossip was that Keppel believed that if he'd actually sent Duncan on the ship, there would never have been any problem, because the French would have never rebelled again, tried to do anything with Duncan, because he's a mobile giant. But he'd kept him aboard ship because he thought it was more valuable having him there. But he did feel that, it would have saved the life of his sailor. It's an interesting point. It is. But the fact is, at this point, Duncan's already getting a reputation for being a very strong, very capable, very wise, for beyond his years, leader. That is the reputation Duncan is getting. He will also stand up for people. He's already getting a reputation for standing up for his crew. His division aboard the ship are considered the finest body of men aboard the ship. They are his division. They're also considered the toughest and the meanest, and a division is basically what you report up to for your ranks. You might have the officer in charge of an operation in your section, but you also have a divisional officer who you report to. That's your divisional officer. So basically, it's another person in chain of command for you to give, to talk to, and so when you fall out when the ship's company is mustered, you muster behind your divisional officer. His division were considered very good, very well trained, very well drilled, but they didn't take nonsense from anyone, and they also were considered godly men who understood the importance of food. And no one was quite sure where that one came from, but the reputation comes because whenever they seem to have captured ships or been involved in capturing ships, it always seems to be Duncan's division which finds the food stores on the ship they're taking and makes sure that some of it's brought back to their own section's food supplies. So, what was his battle experience at this point? Well, his battle experience, both of which take place aboard the Torbay, are the raid on Rochefort and the capture of Gouret. And, of course, there's also the raid on St. Malo as well. Should never forget that, but, St. Malo was a rather smaller operation versus the raid on Gouret. Now, Rochefort has the interesting lesson, of course, and I've discussed before, of once again, timidity can really cause you troubles in war. The Royal Navy managed to bombard the island d'Aix, Ile d'Aix, a little fort there, within a couple of hours, pretty much. They used two ships, Mangamy and Barfleur, a 74 and 80 gunner. And they take the island. They take this island fort. And then they basically wait around for a couple of days whilst the army commander, Mordaunt, keeps calling for further councils of war and try to work things out because there's a ditch. And if it's wet, that'll cause trouble. And can the Navy get in close enough to support them? And these are all interesting things, but you've got Wolfe sitting there going, let's do an immediate assault because they're unprepared. And the thing is, if they had, the moment they got past the island, managed to push straight into Rochefort and push straight up, then probably any defences the French do have available would have been unprepared and unable to do much work. They would be, pardon me, unable to stop them. But the trouble is, the naval officers are sitting there watching the army officers and going, what? What's happening? Why are you doing this? And there's a reason why in this period especially the Royal Navy has a very jaundiced view of army officers. The naval officers are taught to always look for openings in the enemy. Every time they seem to be in an amphibious operation where they're talking things over the army seem to be looking for reasons not to do things. Now you can argue that it's a professional military approach and they are going through and analysing the situation and they don't want to throw their lives away needlessly. And that's all fine. But they take so much time taking a decision, they either throw away the opportunities through time taken or through talking themselves out of it. And they do. They do. Eventually, when they do land some troops at a landing site near Châtillon, well, by that point, they have been sitting off the harbour for roughly a week, and somehow the French have got organised. I can't think how. Who knew? They weren't going to sit there for an entire week waiting for the British to decide to actually land. Hey, caramba. And realistically, they land or they withdraw. Hawke gives Mordaunt an ultimatum. You either get off your behind and do something, or I'm pulling my ships from here and we're going back, because I'm not sitting here forever while you dither. There's only so long I'm prepared to accommodate breathing the same air as you, you indecisive. Yeah. And because of Augustus Kempenfeldt's issues, of course, Lieutenant Duncan gets a front row seat to all of this. He gets to see all these discussions. He then takes part, of course, also again aboard Torbay in the raid of St. Malo, which is another amphibious operation. This time they're given a slightly different military commander, the Duke of Marlborough. And they have Richard Howe as the naval commander. And they have Lord George Sackville there as well, and as a major general. And it's capable. It takes, it's basically, what should I say? Its purpose is to destroy the merchant trades and shipping in St. Malo in Brittany. And they do very, very well. Very well. They destroy 30 privateers and 100 other merchant vessels. So, with very light casualties taken. Incredibly light. And again, it's a very decisive operation. And again, well, Duncan gets to witness this firsthand. And when it comes to the capture of Gorée, well, Keppel is firmly a Commodore. He'd after all served as the Commodore on North American station already. And, well, this operation is one he runs. So, of course, Duncan gets to watch it firsthand. It's 11 ships of the line, 11 warships versus a garrison of 300 men and 110 guns and mortars there. It's a fort. They move in, they bombard, they take. And the island of Gorée, well, that'd be occupied off the coast of Senegal until 1763, following the Treaty of Paris. So 5 years the British would retain control of it. It's one of the few parts of the 7 Years' War which take place in West Africa. These things happen. But what happens now to Duncan's career? Because he's now got to go off and spread his own wings and get his own commands. Now, his promotion had been to commander, not captain, and he'd been put in charge of the Royal Exchange, which was a hired vessel employed for convoy service, which had what was described as an interesting ship's company. Basically, the idea was that you could hire from your merchant companies ships which the Royal Navy would then flag, put an officer in charge of, which would then escort convoys. You wanted someone who was diplomatic to run this gig. Unfortunately, companies being companies, managed to hire a group which mostly consisted of boys and foreigners, many who Duncan reported could not speak English. Thankfully, he could speak a fair number of languages, but he couldn't speak all that were required. And they'd all been put on board with the idea that they were impressed as merchantmen in a merchant ship by the merchants they'd been hired, not subject to naval discipline. And this was very short. He was basically on this ship from October 1759 to April 1760. And HMS Royal Exchange was never carried out again by the Royal Navy. They learnt their service, their experience in future. The crew were engaged by the Navy. They might hire a ship like an armed merchant cruiser, etc., from merchant line, but the crew aboard would all be naval, and they would all be subject to naval rules and discipline. Very simple. Very, very simple. Now, because of that, perhaps, he didn't have much more service until he got HMS Valiant, which he's promoted to command in 25th of February 1761. And the Valiant was Keppel's broad pennant, i.e. it was Keppel's flagship for the reduction of Belle Isle in 1761. Basically, and for Havana in August 1762. Basically, once again, the Royal Navy needed their Keppel Whisperer. And frankly, they'd done him a bit wrong. So making him a flagship captain was a very interesting job because it means he's automatically put onto a post ship. He's automatically put onto a third-rate ship at a line. So he's automatically posted. It's kind of a case of, you're a commander, we're going to make you straight into a full captain, and we're going to post your captaincy so everyone's going to see you're a proper captain. Not just a captain of the Royal Navy, but a captain who's been a captain of a ship which we have to post the command of it. So you're actually now commanding ships which count towards, the time of them do count towards you potentially becoming an admiral in the future. It's kind of a big apology. It's a really big apology. But don't feel too bad for him. The time ashore he used very, very well. He was making connections. Not yet the connections of the family kind. That wouldn't come till 1777. But I will point this out in terms of his personal life, etc. He does very well. When he dies, he has a family of 4 daughters and 2 sons. That's pretty good. But that's still a few years in advance from here. He's got a fairly new ship. Let's be honest, she'd been launched in 1759. She's practically brand new. And he's getting her in 1761. And he takes her off for the capture of Belle Isle. And then on to Havana in Cuba. He has a wonderful time. He really does. Now, this is an interesting operation because basically Pitt has a plan. He's the third time to serve as secretary, and this is in 1760. And it doesn't work anywhere because George II and the Duke of Newcastle oppose him. He wants to capture some of France before there are negotiations. So he says some parts of France they will have to get back to guarantee getting the territories he wants to keep and he wants back. And they decide Belle Isle is pretty much the good place to go because Lorient and Brittany are very close there to it, and you can basically reinforce a blockade from there plus defend it using naval power. So all these things add up to many pluses. Now, when they do finally get permission, it's under George III, not George II. Because George II is finally dead, and he trusts Pitt more, and so they carry out the attack. And the first party, which attacks under a guy called Crawford, doesn't really do well. The diversion doesn't work. The second landing, which was carried out by Hodgson, who was in charge, and let's be honest, any general who is named Studholme Hodgson is not going to be anything other than a hard-charging officer, is he? Studholme Hodgson is not a name you give to someone who's shy and retiring and going to be backing down. You've got Augustus Keppel as your admiral, so it's all pretty darn good. And, well, they start to attack, and the diversionary attack finds itself in an interesting scenario, because they find no one resisting them. The French aren't resisting them because they're all down facing the southern attack, which is the main attack, and they think that the cliffs where they're landing, well, no one can get up because of the cliffs. Unfortunately, the diversionary force is under a guy called Brigadier Hamilton Lambert. And it doesn't matter if they're spelled Lambert or Lambert. In the nicest way, the British Armed Forces have a long history of people that name finding ways to climb things. I don't know what it is. It's one of the joys of history. Go look it up. It's weird. Almost every time the British Armed Forces find a situation where we need to climb this. Oh, our commanding officer's called Lambert or Lambert. Weird. Oh well, let's climb this cliff. It just happens. And they manage to climb it. And because they do, they are very quickly ashore. They very quickly find out that the southern attack is not going to work, so they withdraw. And once they've climbed the top of the ridge, they manage to then counterattack nearby French troops who try to attack, receive support from the Royal Navy, and start commanding the actual island, because they've got the high ground. They are Obi-Wan Kenobi. They have the high ground to the French Anakin. And, well, it gets worse from there for the French defenders, because the French go, we still command the forts, and Chevalier Saint-Croix hoped he could be resist at Le Palais long enough for relief to come from the mainland. Unfortunately, the Duc d'Angoulême of Britain, who's the governor in Brittany, whilst he gathered a force at Vannes and was intending to come to the aid of Belle-Isle, found that, frankly, he couldn't get past the British frigates, who were mainly looking at him going, so you have a load of merchant ships, my friend? Merchant ships to rush to an island? Those look like floating prizes. And he's going, keep away from my ships. Keep away. Don't have that many. And behind the frigates, there's a couple of third rates going, anything for us? Anything going to be coming through for us? Anything? Anyway. The French government keeps sending reinforcements to Brittany, but they can't really go anywhere to Belle-Isle, and all they can do is defend Brittany because they think that's going to be the next place that's attacked. And quickly, St. Croix realizes he can't get any rescue, and quite literally he's being fired down from above, and he's being bombarded from the sea, and he goes, I surrender. He was allowed to march his men out through the breach with honours of war, and his force was repatriated to Lorient by the British. They were happy to do it. They didn't want the prisoners. They didn't frankly need to do it. But, there you go. Belle-Isle is captured, and that's useful. And now, we've reached the Shameless book plug. So, Shameless book plug point. And this video comes out next week when I'm recording this, which is actually quite unusual. And these days, I keep recording videos which are for weeks, if not months in advance. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel, helping it grow, all the stuff you do. I've got a lot of fun stuff planned for this year. I've got a lot of stuff coming up, and I hope you're going to enjoy it all. I really do. There's a lot of interesting points going to be there. One of the things that I've recently done is I have modified memberships on this channel, because there's a short coming out soon which explains why funding is important to naval history. Because someone asked me, why does funding matter? Why does funding matter? And I basically do a short thing of, how funding impacts on study of history. And the fact is, the reason I don't have to play the traditional games, I don't have to worry about grants, which, whilst they select who they're gonna fund, but by what they feel their topic is, but also, they might say we want you to produce journal articles, and we want you to produce books. There are all sorts of things which various funders might do. I was very lucky in my PhD. I was funded by an organisation which really didn't care. They were just happy to fund, and it was really nice. But again, that's the trick, as I always tell my students when they're applying for grants. Don't go for the organisations which are the well-known at the top of the Google search. Go for the ones at the bottom. They're usually the charities and organisations which are, how do I put this, mostly ignored. And they'll be happy, they'll be excited someone's actually paying attention and paying the courtesy. Treat them with respect they deserve. Treat them with honesty. Tell them what you're going to do, and you'll be surprised at how often those smaller groups, those less well-known groups, are very willing to work with you and assist you in what you want to achieve. But these days, I have you. I have memberships. I have Patreon. I have Ko-fi. I have Super Chats and Super Thanks. I have Twitch. And whilst, yes, they don't all bring in a huge amount of money, cumulatively, they pay. They pay for me to be able to do this. And that's thanks to you. And that's really amazing. Thank you. It's a really weird scenario to be in as a historian, as an academic, in that case of, okay, fine, I'm not going to fill out grant applications and all these things. But so I said I'm completely my own authority when it comes to my studies. I decide how I'm going to put the information out. If I want to do a series of short books, 45,000 words, I can do that, and that's what I'm doing. If I want to do a series of very long books, I can do that. I can do what I think the subject matter requires, based entirely on your support. So thank you. Thank you for making it possible. Thank you for making it doable to be done. Right then, peacetime service in 74s. Yes, occasionally peace did break out in the 18th century. It's very weird. No one liked it, but it happens, okay? It happens. And you deal with it. You deal with it like a man by starting a war. Now, in 1777, he gets married. He marries Henrietta, the daughter of Robert Dundas, who is the Lord President of the Court of Session, a very, very senior Scottish parliamentarian, and a very powerful man in Scottish politics, and also very much connected to a lot of the grander things going on in British politics at this point. So, a lot of families, a lot of relatives. This made his brother-in-law, Adam Duncan's brother-in-law, Henry Dundas, was of course the Treasurer of the Navy. Now, interesting enough, at this time, Treasurers of the Navy are kind of an interesting role. I've discussed them already when I've talked about the Royal Navy's sort of the Admiralty and the staff officers. One of the little lesser known things about Treasurers of the Navy is that they tend to be involved in the Royal Navy's wider information gathering network. What do I mean by this? Well, you see, the Royal Navy has a long history of having an informal intelligence network. That's British merchantmen and the insurance companies. Treasury and Navy, who does business with them, of course has the perfect position to cultivate such relationships. And so, one of the things you find throughout history is that so often some of the information seems to flow through the Treasury and Navy, come from the Treasury and Navy. You almost get the idea at some point. I've worked with some historians who go, "Oh, they were the spy masters of the Royal Navy." They weren't. They weren't, but they were basically the kings of the largest access of open source intelligence that you had available at the time. Think about it. There's no internet. Newspapers are a random and rare thing, etc. Your open source intelligence network is gossip. And if you're a Navy, you're looking for foreign intelligence, so you need people who travel to gossip. Or people who work with people who travel who gossip. And that's merchants. That is merchants. So that's why the Treasury and Navy often appears in this interesting thing. So Duncan is now connected with these very powerful people, this very powerful family. Which is helpful because if you want to chart an officer's likelihood of getting to seniority, it's whether the Royal Navy employs them in peacetime or not. Again, remember, it's the time in service, the sea time, which builds up, which matters for their seniority and their promotion in many ways to Admiral, and whether they're going to get any higher. So again, how can the Royal Navy, the Admiralty and the Royal Navy manipulate who's getting the senior officer or not? Well, who gets employed into peacetime? And what do they get employed as? He's appointed to HMS Suffolk, and then HMS Monarch. Now, why am I calling this peacetime, though? Because surely 1777, there's the American Revolutionary War going on. Well, yes, there is, but the Anglo-French War doesn't start till 1778, and the Anglo-Spanish War doesn't start till 1779, and frankly, the American Revolutionary Naval Forces They have a lot of good PR. They're not exactly massive or require a massive Royal Navy response. But they have a lot of good PR. I will say that they have a lot of good PR. And the things they do, the missions they do is pretty darn cool. And pretty darn, it shows some great nascent capability. But the fact is, it's like 2-3 ships at any one point actually doing anything. And you don't need to activate the whole Royal Navy to contain that and limit its options. Okay, if you did, you'd be able to stamp it out very quickly, but it'd be very expensive. Now that might be a problem. That is a problem in terms of if you consider when the French do come in and the Spanish do come in, the British are caught in a way napping because they think they're just fighting a low intensity conflict in North America, and suddenly they're dealing with their two largest opponents in Europe at the same time and around the world, and they suddenly got a world war to fight, and yeah, that causes issues. But he's managed to get married. He's managed to use this time to forge a lasting connection, not just with Henrietta herself, but with the Dundas family. And it is definitely a lasting connection, considering, well, he and her managed to have still living four daughters and 2 sons when he dies. Considering the likelihood of early mortality, etc., in this period, they did pretty well. They did pretty well. And he's successful enough that not only does one of his sons follow him into the Navy, Henry, but also his nephew, James Haldane Tate, follows him into Navy, and he managed to look after him. He gets the rank of Rear Admiral as well. He does well. One of the things I think he would have been annoyed by is the fact that whilst it's very nice that he is buried where he is, and buried in Lundie, west of Dundee, and he'd be happy with that, I think he'd be a little bit upset that his wife and children are buried in Canongate Kirkyard in Edinburgh. And that they're not buried in the same place. I just get that feeling from him. From the way he talks about his family, from the way his family talks about him, I think that if there's any regret, that would have been it. But that's a long way away at this point. That's a long way away. It's nearly 30 years away when we're talking about him now. He has a lot of living to do. Suffolk and Monarch are good ships. They are good for him, certainly. He has a lot of fun with them. I would point out again that when he is getting these ships ready, well, and doing things, the Royal Navy in this period, January 1779 especially, is having a court-martial of Keppel and Palliser because of the First Battle of Ushant and the issues that happened there. And what can I say about Duncan? Well, he not only has married to a legal family, and a family which is heavily involved in law, but he himself has developed a fine reputation as an advocate in the Royal Navy. And during the course of the trial, he objected to the prosecutor being irrelevant, and leading questions also, or perversions of answers, and was critiquing them quite a lot. And probably it's thanks to him that Keppel does as well as he does in his trial. The Admiralty therefore did not want him sitting on Hugh Palliser's trial. Now, the interesting thing I would like to point out is that Keppel is a Whig, i.e. a forerunner of the Liberal Democrat Party, sort of that's Liberals and Liberal Democrats sort of party language. Duncan had married Dundas into Dundas family, which were Tories. So he has married across the political divide, if you believe he followed Keppel's politics. I don't think he did. I think he's a floating voter. That is my view of him. I think he's one of those few who could afford to be a floating voter and was powerful enough to be a floating voter in this period. And this is what probably really worried the Admiralty, because he would be the same even-handed fairness with both sides. And Keppel was his old boss, who helped him rise up and helped look after him. So of course there was some loyalty there, but he also knew Palliser had a decent relationship, and so again it would be considered very even. So they tried to set the court-martial for April, and they gave him orders for Monarch to go to St. Helens. However, his crew hadn't been paid their advance, and for a very rare occasion for a crew, they refused to do it, but they didn't mutiny. They hadn't been paid their advance, and normally, the one who'd be causing the most trouble out of this would be Duncan, but he hadn't. And so they couldn't sail. So when the court-martial order is made, and the very nice captain of Monarch, HMS Monarch, Captain Duncan, turns up and sits on the court-martial. And do you know what happens when the pay finally arrives for the crew, their advance? There's a bonus from their captain in it as well. I mean, isn't that nice of the captain? Isn't that nice of him? This man is so cool. During 1779, he's attached to the Channel Fleet under Sir Charles Hardy. Then they're attached to Rodney, and they get to go take on, well, the relief of Gibraltar, and take part in the actions of St. Vincent on the 6th of January 1780, and they do pretty darn well in them. You know, the relief of Gibraltar, that's a big thing, but the action of St. Vincent, the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, that is an interesting battle. It's otherwise known as the Moonlight Battle. It's not the glorious 1st of June that earned St. Vincent his name. It's the earlier one. It's under Sir George Rodney. And it's 18 ships of the line, 3 frigates, and 3 other smaller but still post-rated ships against de Langara's 11 ships of the line and 2 frigates. And well, HMS Monarch, she's a useful vessel in this battle. Now, accounts of her involvement in the action do vary, but it's known she exchanged broadsides with many ships. And again, the odds of considering the damage she took compared to some of the other losses, she actually has 3 killed, which makes her not the highest in terms of killed. That's HMS Defence. She loses 10, and Edgar loses 6, but Invincible also loses 3, and she gets 26 wounded, which means she has the highest number of killed and wounded of any ship. From the understandings, what she does in this battle, because Rodney first, to ascertain the enemy's strength, basically has his ships fall in line abreast. And then once he's shown the enemy his full strength, and he's realised they're not the van of a mighty force, they are the whole force, general chase. So they all chase up, and the orders are to move to their leeward to try and block them off from going to port, and to engage the ships in turn as they come up. It is known that HMS Monarch was a very fast ship under Duncan. This actually leads to some mild rivalry during the fleet at Camperdown, because Duncan is actually under the command of, this is the flagship for Oslo, the other admiral at the point, rather than being Duncan's steed. And Duncan used to regularly send messages along the lines of, I could have got more speed out of her than that. I got more speed out of her than that. Just to egg them on and wind them up. Just a tad. And, yeah. But she does well. And he's proving himself a very able captain. And one interesting thing is everywhere he goes, the admirals go, you're useful. We like you. We're going to employ you. It's good for him. It's good for his career-wise. And it carries on. Now, realistically, the worst thing for many in the Admiralty that came out of the Keppel Palliser affair was that they really, really annoyed Keppel, and thanks to Duncan managing to prevent a small smear campaign being carried out against him in terms of politics, well, because he insisted on being honourable, just terrible, well, Keppel goes on to find himself becoming the new First Lord of the Admiralty in 1782. And with Duncan having quit HMS Monarch, when he returned to the UK in 1780, spending some time with a wife and sorting out things, he suddenly finds himself with a gentleman in the First Lord of the Admiralty who feels he owes him a lot of favours, and feels that this man has helped him achieve his goals. So yeah, HMS Blenheim, 90 guns, this is your reward. And he serves under Admiral Howe in her, again earning Howe's quite decent respect, especially during the Cape Spartel affair. And he then succeeds John Jervis in command of the Fordrant. Does well there. She's a nice 80-gun ship. And then he gets HMS Edgar as a guard ship in Portsmouth for 3 years. And that's in peacetime, so he's got a peacetime command. Again, he's getting something in peacetime. He's doing well. He's being respected. He's getting his time. And honestly, it's good for him. It is good for him. And now, well, he has time to ascend up the ranks. And realistically, he doesn't get up to that much in this period. He is usually being a solid officer in fleets where they need him, and that is it. He is staying at home or he's being sent out. He's he attained the rank of Rear Admiral, 24th September 1787. He does well in it. He's respected. He's capable. He's not something startling. That's what they expect. They think of him more of as a solid officer. They really do. And this is a sort of interesting thing, because he's been such a solid and dependable officer. That's sort of what the Royal Navy thinks of him as, a safe pair of hands. And then in 1793, he becomes a Vice Admiral. And in February 1795, he's appointed Commander-in-Chief North Sea. First of all as a Vice Admiral, then being made a full Admiral on 1st of June 1795. And this is his ascent. He's not commanded any major battles, but he's put in the time. He's been there. He's been present. His list of battles is respectable. You know, he fought in the raid of Rochefort, the raid of St. Malo, the capture of Goury, the capture of Belle Isle, the siege of Havana, the siege of Gibraltar, the battle of Cape St. Vincent, and the battle of Cape Spartel. He done well in all these operations, but mostly he's one of those officers who the Royal Navy knows is reliable, and they're going to keep in fleets like the Channel Fleet, North Sea Fleet. So if anyone breaks home, if anyone gets past the Mediterranean Squadron, the Western Squadron, and actually starts heading to invade Britain, they're going to find themselves dealing with the officers who don't make mistakes. There's some very interesting discussions and papers slowly starting to be written about the officers in this period and how the Royal Navy is managing its personnel. And basically, if you look at it, the officers who take the greater risks and go for glory are set off the Mediterranean Fleet and the other fleets, drawing around the world to take charge. But officers who, they don't make mistakes. They might take risks, but they don't make mistakes. Solid officers. You'll find them normally in the closer to home fleets. The fleets where absolutely you cannot afford to make a mistake. Where your fleet unit is going to behave as one solid force. And that's what they start to train. And that's what they start to build. And so yes, he's ascended. But then we have the Mutinies. And this is when he really does shine in so many ways. Now, the Mutinies are interesting because The Nor mutiny is a very nasty mutiny. It's down dirty. It's political. There's all sorts of problems, and it's got a far wider focus than the Spithead mutiny. The Spithead mutiny was far more about economics. They make a beseechment to Lord Howe, their former commander, basically saying, look, our current admirals and current officers aren't looking after us. They aren't ensuring we get paid. They aren't ensuring we're being well fed. We're mutinying because of this. And Lord Howe intercedes. And the thing is, they were being not responded to because of by Lord Spencer, who thought that if he ignored them, they'd go away. But they got there, Lord Howard then intercedes, and they get their increased pay, their removing of unpopular officers who basically want to ignore them, and improving conditions. So one of the interesting things is the unpopular officers were not the ones who were hard disciplinarians. No, the unpopular officers were the ones who didn't care about the men. They didn't care. If you were a disciplinarian, that's fine. As long as you also live up to your side of the bargain, which is make sure we're fed, watered, and on time and provisioned properly. You can be a really nice officer, but if you don't do that, we don't want you. And you can be a sodden officer, but as long as you do that, we'll accept you. So basically, it's almost like the men were protesting over lack of professionalism amongst their officers. Nor was far more about wanting ministry change and all sorts of things. Yarmouth, where Duncan's fleet is based, which is the North Sea Fleet, is kind of different. They're closer to Spithead. When Venerable itself, his flagship, there are men climbing to rigging and roar free cheers to try and start a revolt. Duncan initially marched up himself and threatened to run the ringleader through his sword. And that caused them all to be a bit shocked, and then some officers come forward and go, "Sir, we should talk about this. We should talk about what we do." Okay, back he comes back, and then he assembles the officers and the Royal Marines, and a lot of loyal sailors as well, and then marches up to the group, and in the rigging, half clambering up into the rigging to shout close to them and demanding to know what they were doing. His tone is considered fierce enough that the vast majority, barring the ringleaders, quickly decided that they wanted to be elsewhere. Anywhere else but this admiral who they quite respect, who's very pissed at them and very big and very Scottish. There have been people who've written whole nightmares with less ingredients than that. This was not a scenario. Yes, we'll fight people. Yes, we'll fire cannon and take cannon shot. This is a very pissed off, very senior admiral. And then, what does he do to the 5 ringleaders? He admonishes them personally. He rips into them personally for a full half an hour. And then he issues a general pardon and sends them all back to their duty. He was told off for that one. And he said that it's my ship, my crew, my rules. Broadly speaking. You pardon them? You should have made examples of them. I'd done that. I made them a laughing stock. He's a very, very smart admiral. The next week, he assembles all the crew and demands to know whether they'd follow his orders. The crew nominated a spokesman, who apologised for it and said, "We humbly implore your honour's pardon with hearts full of gratitude and tears in our eyes for the offence we have given the worthiest of commanders who's proved a father to us." The thing is, they knew that when food was an issue or pay was an issue, he'd found ways around the situation. They had faith in him. In many ways, they'd risen in broader sympathy of their wider friends, and some people being a bit agitators, and it wasn't always a good experience. But I would also point out in that week he'd also gone through the fleet, and some junior officers had decided that their career paths needed them to be elsewhere because they weren't up to snuff. He goes aboard HMS Adamant, which is also having a bit of a mutiny. And he literally storms aboard. They don't realise he's coming. They're mutinying, and suddenly this big admiral comes up the side of the ship and literally storms into the middle of them. And he's got no guards around him. He's just storming in this big, impressive admiral in his coat, just going, "Excuse me," and shouts out if there's any man who disputed his authority. And this is when a sailor stepped forward. So Duncan seizes him by the shirt and dangles him over the side of the ship with one arm. He is literally holding him over the side of the ship with one arm. Okay, this is your nightmare. Angry Scottish Admiral. Literally angry enough that with adrenaline, he's holding one of your colleagues over the side of the ship, one-armed. And says, "My lads, look at this fellow. He who dares deprive me of command of the fleets." For some reason, and I can't think why, all the mutineers decided that, frankly, today wasn't a good day to mutiny. In fact, they had other things to do, and they were going to find what they were going to do down below as quickly as they possibly could, or maybe up in the rigging, wherever they could get as far away from the Admiral as physically possible, because they really didn't want to be around to see what he did next. And yes, there are ships which do run off, and there are ships which cause problems, but Duncan keeps his fleet mostly together. He manages to keep enough of a presence on the Dutch coast that he does give the Dutch the idea the fleet's still active. And, well, he's actually doing well enough that the Admiralty feels comfortable calling him, messaging to Duncan, and goes, "Well, if the North start blocking off the Thames estuary and start blocking off traffic, will you come force it open? If they try to block off the Port of London, will you come force it open?" And his response is, "I do not shirk from the business. If it cannot otherwise be got the better of." However, the crews expressed their distaste at the plan, but on the ships, they expressed their distaste, but pretty much to a ship. They told their captains they were loyal to their admiral, and they would follow him. And basically, it was well known amongst the fleet, because the admiral's view was he would only do it if the Nore estuary, the squadron in Nore, blocked the Thames and blocked trade and food to London. Then it would be the only way he would move. And the fleet sort of seems happy with that. Okay, so as long as they don't do anything stupid, we don't have to move. But they do that, they're starting a civil war. There is mutiny, and there is that. And to be fair, quite a lot of the sailors' reports, especially from the Yarmouth Squadron, but also from other parts, feel sorry for the Nore fleet, because they don't have officers like Duncan. The thing is, Duncan's this big, scary guy when he wants to be, but he's also a big, scary guy on your side. The same force, and this is what the sailors know about Duncan, the same force he'll use in establishing his authority over his ships, he uses to go to the Admiralty or to stand up for people when they're when there's the wrong, and he pardons people quite often. He'll tell you off and then he'll pardon you. He's allowed to rip you a complete and utter new one any time if you do something stupid or if you are in the wrong. But no one else is going to come for you, because they're going to have to go through him. And that phrase, a commander, the worthiest of the commanders who has proved a father to us, that is more than just a random phrasing. That was the thing in the sort of the scenario they were looking at. We're talking about a situation where, yes, in many ways, the Admiral is supposed to be the father of the fleet. They're supposed to make sure, be the head of the fleet, but also supposed to be the provider. Make sure they're fed, make sure they're trained, make sure they're supplied with all the materials they need to do their jobs. You're short on clothes, clothes will be found. The Admiralty will pay the bill. Maybe they pay it now, maybe they pay it later, but they're paying it. But it will be paid, but you will have your materials now. That is what Duncan runs his fleet on. And that works. It works well. It means that he has a loyal fleet. And it means that when it comes to the Battle of Camperdown, when De Winter, the Dutch commander, finally breaks out, what you find is that Duncan actually has a well-honed sword to use. And far from being that solid commander who doesn't make mistakes, he turns out to be an inherently aggressive, very scary, calculating commander who really solidly punches straight through the Dutch as hard as physically possible. And he can do this because he's got a well-trained fleet which is very much loyal to him personally. They are very loyal to Duncan. And they will literally do, in this case, follow him through the gates of hell and beyond. Enemy cannon thundering to left and to right, and they're following on because Duncan's going forward, so they're following Duncan. And that's what happens in this battle. And that's after these mutinies and after all these issues, they are still personally loyal to this man to a level which, honestly, if he'd wanted to, he could have probably made himself king. He's that popular in the Navy at this point. And it's really weird, because you look around going, hang on, he hasn't won a massive battle. How's he got this following in the Navy, in the wider Navy? And it's because of the way he treats his crews. It's because of the way he's respected amongst the officers and the men. And that's a scary person for this period, for the 18th century. This is a very scary person. The difference in leadership between De Winter, who was the leader of the Dutch, and Duncan can be seen most in the fact that when De Winter is ordered to sea, he didn't want to go. He didn't think it was sensible. Duncan, who was sitting in Yarmouth, doing what he needed to do in terms of revictualling his fleet, when he got word from Henry Trollope, who was the captain of HMS Russell, which was running the close-in squadron, watching what the Dutch were up to, and received information that the Dutch were getting ready to go to sea, he weighed anchor and, benefiting from a fair wind, approached the Dutch coast as rapidly as he could. He saw that they not returned to Texel, and steered south, and on the 11th of October, in the morning, about 7 miles from the shore and halfway between the villages of Edgemont and Camperdown, he sighted the Dutch. The wind was blowing straight to shore, mostly, and the Dutch started forming their line to the north, preserving what was considered a bold front. But the thing is, their positioning made it clear that if the battle didn't take place soon, they would get into a shoal water, and where their shallow drafts would give them a massive advantage. Duncan realized this. He realized that you had to cut off their retreat by getting between them and the land. And he starts off with working out whether he needs to keep his fleet together as a compact force or let it spread out. He decides that he has to place faith in his men and his ships. He decides that he needs to return their faith in him, and by showing he has absolute faith in them. And so, instead of waiting to form line of battle, and instead of waiting for the ships which were astern to come up, and with the fleet in and absolutely not the order of sailing they're supposed to be, but divided into two groups, himself leading it Venerable and Vice Admiral Onslow in Monarch, the other group, he made a signal. He orders his ships to pass through the enemy's line and engage to leeward. In other words, go through them and then attack them from the shore. Attack them from their direction of safety. Get between them and home and then cut them down. It completely goes against the rules of the fighting instructions, which had been issued not that long ago by Howe and others. It was a repeat of what Howe had done in the 1st of June 1794, which of course had been a battle which, well, the glorious 1st of June, unfortunately, Duncan had missed out on, but which he knew of and he had studied. And well, this was going to be bloody. But would it offer success is the question. Well, probably guess it already does, but let's show how. Let's discuss how it does. Now, whilst making these decisions, he's also making pronouncements like, I am determined to fight the ships on land if I cannot by sea, and, yeah, he's just being full Duncan. He does go absolutely and completely full Duncan. And it works. It works. One of the fun things about the signals coming up is that John Inglis, the captain of HMS Bellatrix, throws his signal book to the deck in frustration and shouts, "Up with the helm and gang into the middle of it," because he cannot. Because Duncan's sending out orders, coordinating his fleet, and Inglis is going trying to do his book and just goes, "I give up." He said, "Attack the enemy. Attack into the centre of them. We go that way." He has managed over 2 years, and even through the mutinies of Commander's fleet, to turn them into absolute nutters to a man. In that they are, the closest I can put them is look at World War II destroyer commanders. This is what this force is looking like. This is what this force is acting like. It's calculated risks. We charge the enemy now. We get close. We smash them. We stop them from getting home. We can get prizes. We can win this. We're not quite... There are so many orders. We're trying to coordinate such a complicated maneuver. I give up. We're just going for the enemy. No one will tell us off as long as we go and kill them. For De Winter, who hadn't wanted to be there in the first place, this fact that the British are not forming line, that they're just coming on, he's almost watching them going, you've got to form line. You've got to form line. It's too late. You need to form line. You have to form line. Why haven't you formed line? Why are you not forming line? Where's the line? Where's the line? Why are you not forming line? You need to form line. You form line. You're not forming line. What are you doing? It's such an unexpected thing. It's such an unexpected reality. And he tries to order the van and the centre to drop back to assist the rear, but there's no time. It's just coming on too fast. They haven't expected this situation to happen like this. And whilst the lines are, broadly speaking, the same. The British have 16 ships aligned, the Dutch have 15. They have some other quite big ships, so, they're not necessarily too bad order, but the Latvian Republic is, as usual, managing to reinforce failure, but we'll leave that to one side, or cause failure. Their own political leadership is just so many issues. So many issues. And the thing is, De Winter is just, he's so caught off. They were supposed to form line. They're supposed to follow the rules. And the Dutch line was supposed to be backed up by this line of frigates and brigs and smaller craft, but as well as armed as they were, and as well as the capable as they were compared to their counterparts in the British ship, even these small ships start to get bodied by the British ships coming in, because those ships are coming straight for them. And it's a case of, well, you'll come for us in groups. No. Literally, the British battle plan is turning into we are going to mass on your rear and chomp on that, and then we're going to move forward and chomp on the rest, and we're going to keep doing that. We're not going to go up and form a nice line and fight you like this, boom, boom. No. You're going to be like this, and we're going to go, boom. That's it. That's what Duncan's delivering. Duncan is delivering a fight which has some strategy to it, some thought to it, but ultimately he's made the strategy has happened beforehand. Ultimately, the strategy is in the training, it's in the forming of the fleet, it's in the fact the fleet trusts itself, and they trust their admiral. And they will quite literally, they realise what they're doing is absolutely out there as high risk, and they're all happily behind their admiral. They're following their admiral. If in doubt, they follow their admiral. That is what he's done with this fleet. And you can... There are others who would do a prettier plan, a fancier operation, all these things, but ultimately, he's got his fleet there, and he's got his fleet into this position. At 12:05 on the day of engagement, he has basically been flying constantly, engaged the enemy closely. And that's his signal. And to be honest, there are some people joking, how close does he want us to get? Crash into them? Does he want us to round them? Because we'll do that if that's what our admiral's asking. And frankly, it seems like he wouldn't mind much. At this point, though, Rear Admiral, that is Schubenacht. Remember, the Dutch for Rear Admiral is Schubenacht. Hermanus Regitz was fourth from the Southern End Line, opens fire. He opens fire on HMS Monarch. His ship is Jupiter. And of course, Monarch is Duncan's old ship, which is under Onslow's command, which is being pushed forward because they are constantly in a race with their former captain who keeps going, I could have got more speed out of her, I could have got her going faster, and Onslow's just going, I hate you and I love you. It's that kind of relationship. They have a beautiful, beautiful friendship. It truly is remarkable. It's also incredibly adversarial in some ways. It's pure Royal Navy, you know. It's a case of, you are the admiral who I most look up to, and I hate you at the same time. I'm going as fast as I can. I'm going faster than you. I could have got it going faster. Shut up. It's that kind of relationship. Anyway, as they get into it, as they start to get into the fight, and as they start pushing it, Onslow's flagship is under fire at one point from the entire rear guard of the Dutch line, and Monarch doesn't stop. She doesn't stop. She breaks the line between Jupiter and Harlem. Her captain, Aaron Bryan, remarking that he cannot see where his ship could pass through the line of Dutch ships, Onslow responds, the Monarch will make a passage. That's the quote which is often passed down. There is actually another version of that quote which is also passed down in a different bit of history, which is, the Monarch will make that passage. We will not disappoint Duncan. And I think possibly that bit wasn't said, but was inferred. But I'm not sure, because as I said, I've had one source which has that. We will not insult Duncan. We will not disappoint Duncan. And I've had some which say it does, and most don't mention it. So, you know, this thing. And he did. And unfortunately, at this point, a Dutch frigate and a brig tried to pull out a second line to attempt to fill the gap which Monarch has created. And Onslow blasts them as well out the way. He destroys the Monarch, the frigate's wheel and rigging, and forces her to fall back and smashed up the brig as well. And Monarch is followed by HMS Powerful under the command of Captain William O'Brien Drury, who passes through the same gap, raking the Harlem again and adding extra destruction to that poor frigate, which had tried to plug the hole. And then HMS Montague is attacking Akmar, and HMS Russell under Captain Trollope is attacking the 54-gun Delft. And HMS Monmouth has managed to pass between Akmar and the Delft and has raked both ships, and HMS Director, under the command of William Bligh of the Bounty fame, had passed on the Dutch line to reach the battered Harlem and engaged that at close range. HMS Veteran joined the northern part of the engagement, cutting across Jupiter and then going in pursuit of the Dutch centre. Adamant reached the fight and then started going on against the Harlem again. Agincourt didn't quite get into the battle at this point, but passed up the Dutch line, keeping the rest of them interested in her. Basically, she was doing a Africa at the Battle of Trafalgar. When an officer on the deck, flinched because of a shot passing over the deck, the crew shouted out, "There is no danger yet, sir," and her captain was actually later court-martialed and dismissed for not showing proper courage. He'd been warned by Duncan earlier. He'd been warned. Duncan was always consistently harder on the officers than he was on the men. He expected more of them. And as they start to disengage and they start to fall apart, well, this is when the really nasty stuff happens, because at this point, Venerable smashes into the Winter's flagship, the Virheld. He smashes into her 18 minutes after Monarch broke the line to the south. Duncan had been planning on breaking the line himself between Virheld and Staten General. His plan was to basically take out the Shubinacht Samuel Story's flagship, the Staten General, and the Winter's flagship, Virheld. He felt he should take both simultaneously. There was an honest discussion going on about this at this point on Duncan's ship about whether or not admirals can lead boarding parties. There is an honest discussion going on about this. It's one of the things which appears in some books, doesn't appear in others, and appears in some accounts of the time. But there is a fairly certain thing that Duncan himself felt he should lead a boarding party. His flag captain was very, very much trying to avoid this. Captain Fairfax, that's William George Fairfax, who himself goes on to become a Vice Admiral, we probably owe a lot of gratitude to for not enabling that to happen. At a certain point, though, it even occurred to Duncan that, frankly, this was not possibly the best position for him to be in, that he was taking on these two flagships, and he was, as good as Venerable is, and she was a lovely ship, you can tell she is the flagship of the North Sea. She's a 74. In fact, that's all he has. He has no second rates. He has no first rates in the North Sea Fleet. They're all 74s. After all, they're only going to have to fight the Dutch, and the Dutch are very good sailors, very confident sailors, but they don't have bigger ships than that either, so that's all you need. So this is entirely a third-rate and fourth-rate fleet. And that's fine. Duncan's going to make use of it, but still, it does mean that even his flagship doesn't have necessarily the fighting power to take on two third rates simultaneously. So what does he do? Well, he decides that he's going to go behind the Staten General, so he's going to cut through behind. This is Story's ship, of course, who was the gentleman who lost his fleet in the Vliet incident. And he managed to make it to drift off because he slams into it twice with two broadsides from the rear, so rakes it twice. And then manages to push around, so he's just engaging the Virheld, the Winter ship, solo. So he's basically smashed off Story's ship with one maneuver, and then broken around, so he's now engaging the Winter ship. And, well, Virheld has also found that HMS Ardent has come up to go, look, nice way, we're not letting our admiral fight a battle alone. We're not. Captain Richard Rundle Burgess, who's in charge of HMS Ardent, had gone, that's our admiral. We go. Burgess himself gets killed. They suffer over 100 casualties. And they are caught between the Winter's flagship, the Virheld, and the Admiral Trekheed's De Vries, the next ship ahead. But Venerable carries on. Venerable turns up, and basically the time which Ardent spent fighting them, which was literally the time while Venerable was getting rid of the Staten General, Venerable now tags in and supports Ardent. And this is when their frigates, the Royal Navy frigates, actually start coming in. Frigates aren't supposed to really get involved in this kind of battle. They're not supposed to really be trying to duke it out in a battle between ships of the line. But Duncan's frigates decide that their admiral looks like he's in trouble and no one else can get to him. So they're going. They go. It's that simple. And the fighting goes on. At one point, the colours and signal flags of the Venerable are shot down by cannon fire, and a guy called Jack Crawford, one of the sailors, pulls them up to the top of the mainmast to replace them so that no one would dare think his admiral had struck his colours. No one would think he had it done. Of course, Duncan makes sure Jack is appropriately rewarded after the battle. Then finally come up HMS Triumph and HMS Bedford under Captains William Essington and Captain Sir Thomas Bard, and they literally slam into this fight where the Admiral is leading the battle unsupported, and they're just going, nope, no, not happening. No, no one gets the Admiral. He's our Admiral. Not happening. And the fight just carries on, and by this time the rear is starting to collapse. The Dutch rear is starting to collapse there, and Onslow's ships are starting to pull up in the centre where Duncan's ships have slammed in, and the full battle has now arrived. HMS Lancaster turns up and tears in. She's finally made it to the battle, and she tears into the Dutch battle line, going straight for the Bessemer. At the head, she basically goes, right then, I've missed the fight with the rear and the centre. The van looks untouched. Take me to them. And they carry on fighting. The Dutch carry on fighting. They hold their line as long as they can. They fight as hard as they can. But eventually, De Winter is forced to surrender. He's forced to surrender. When the British actually do board the flagship, and this is from HMS Director, which was William Bligh's ship, they board De Winter's flagship. They find De Winter himself assisting the carpenter with repairs to the vessel. When he was told he was a prisoner of war, "This is my destiny not foreseen," is his response. He checked on some of the mortally wounded officers who are on his quarterdeck, and then he follows the boarding party to their trip for the Venerable. When he gets to the Venerable, when he gets to there, it's an interesting scenario because De Winter comes up and holds out his sword to surrender. Duncan shows the character of the man again. I would much rather take a brave man's hand than his sword, and shakes him by the hand. This is Duncan, pure and free. At this point, they start doing accounts of the bill. They start taking in who has been captured, what's fleed. Duncan doesn't follow the fleeing Dutch ships. He's captured enough of them. He really has captured enough of them. When you consider of the Dutch fleet that engaged, 15 ships of line, 6 frigates, 4 brigs and another small vessel, 9 ships of line were captured and 2 frigates were captured. The Dutch lost 540 killed, 620 wounded, and 3,775 captured. The British were not without their losses either. 203 killed, of which 100 were aboard Ardent, and 622 wounded. And that was a butcher's bill. That was a butcher's bill. But Duncan had won the battle. And he'd won the battle by doing something which no one really thought he would do. After all, he was a solid British commander of the North Sea Squadron. He's supposed to be conservative. He's supposed to not make mistakes, not do any major risks. And he'd just done a massive risk, you could argue, but it was a massive calculated risk. It won the action. It won, for all intents and purposes, the War of the First Coalition in that particular area. And it made sure that in the War of the Second Coalition, the Dutch fleet was really not much of a presence. As capable as they were, as skilled officers as they were, after Camperdown, they're never the same. They're never the same. So that being considered, let's talk about his legacy. So let's start off with what happens when he dies. Let's consider his legacy from that perspective. This is what Nelson writes in 1804 to Captain Henry Duncan, newly promoted, the youngest son of Admiral Duncan. There is no man who more sincerely laments the heavy loss you have sustained than myself. But the name of Duncan will never be forgot by Britain, and in particular by its navy, in which service the remembrance of your worthy father will, I am sure, grow up in you. I am sorry not to have a good sloop to give you, but still an opening offers, which I think will ensure your confirmation as a commander. And he is good to his word. There are many officers prepared to be sponsors to Duncan's family in the Navy because they are good. They are good. They do take after their father. But also because their father was someone they truly cared for. As he was rewarded, there is a wonderful statue of him at the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. And he is one of those people who it's worthwhile going and hunting down. You know, his aunt, Lady Mary Duncan, wrote to the Secretary of State of War at the time, Henry Dundas. A sort of relation. Report says my nephew is only made a Viscount. Myself it is nothing, but the whole nation thinks the least you can do is give him an English earldom. I'm sure this properly represented to our good king, who esteems a brave religious man like himself, would be of my opinion. It doesn't actually happen, but honestly, one of the fun things that do happen is that the fact the king is usually trying to meet him. The king spends a lot of efforts to try and meet up with Duncan. And Duncan was awarded the large naval gold medal and a pension of £3,000 to his heirs, to himself and his next two heirs to his title. That was the biggest pension ever awarded at that point by the British government. And he's of course given the freedom of cities and various other pieces of plate. He gets really quite heavily recognised in some regards. And yes, he's treated well. I'd say the other legacy of him is that his quiet service and calculated risk approach becomes something the Royal Navy really likes. And there is a reason why, when we start to look at ships named for him, you start to realise that there have actually been more ships named for him since 1804 than there have been ships named for Admiral Nelson. There was in 1804 a mercantile vessel which was renamed HMS Duncan. Then there was a third rate in 1811, a 101 guns first rate in 1859, a Duncan class battleship in 1901, a D class destroyer in 1932, a Type 14 a Blackwood class frigate in 1957, and of course HMS Duncan today, the Type 45 destroyer. They've amassed quite an interesting set of battle honours: Spartavento, Malta Convoys, Mediterranean Atlantic, and Diego Suarez. There's even been, talks of more vessels. It's a traditional name in the Royal Navy by this point. And in comparison, whilst yes, there's a shore establishment in Portsmouth, which is named HMS Nelson, in terms of ships, which I'm sure Nelson would have cared for more than a base. I'm sure Nelson would have preferred a base over a shore establishment. Well, you have just 1814, the 120-gun first rate, then the Nelson-class armoured cruiser, and of course Nelson-class battleship, and HMS Lord Nelson, which goes along with HMS Agamemnon. So you've had four for Nelson, and a shore establishment. And yet, for our good friend Duncan, well, 7. I think it's because of the quiet professionalism, and I think it's because of the calculated risk-taking. And I think it's because the example it gives the officers that, yes, you might be considered the safe pair of hands all your career. But the thing is, you will still know when it is time to take a risk, you take that risk, and you do what you need to do, and you win the battle. And that being said, I want you to think of today's question, because I always finish the videos with a question, is think of other times when personal leadership has been quite so ebulliently exampled. I'd like you to think about that. If you're going to compare Duncan to anyone, which other leaders does he remind you of? With that being said, what have we got coming up? Well, next week we have Suffren, the Admiral. And that'll be a fun video. That will be Pierre-André de Suffren, the Admiral. A French officer so great that the Royal Navy doesn't need to give him his name. They just say you're fighting the Admiral and you know who it is. That's a hell of a commander. Thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. So,